Beautiful place we're in, and good news and all sorts of things. But we're very honoured and privileged to be joined today by our Finnish minister, Aino-Kaisa Pekonen. And the minister has to go to the parliament. I mean, really, you know, she has to go to the parliament after here. So just quickly to tell you that she has been Minister of Social Affairs and Health, which sounds to me like a very big portfolio, since 2011, and focusing on social health policy. Luckily, she's a trained nurse. So we have a minister who is useful in more ways than one. She used to work as a housing counsellor and also, of course, in the health sector. She's involved in many civil organisations, including she's the chair of the board of the Finnish HIV Foundation. So, Minister, please, it's a great pleasure. The floor is yours.
Yes? Okay, thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure I welcome you all to Finland, to the House of Estates. This building has played an important role in Finland's history and the Finnish democracy. I would like to begin with a couple of words on the priorities of Finland's presidency. As the presidency of the Council of the European Union, Finland wants to contribute in building socially, economically and ecologically sustainable future for Europe. A key priority of Finland's presidency is the EU's global leadership in climate action. This means committing to climate neutrality by 2050, making it in a socially just way. Furthermore, another priority of Finland's is to make the EU more competitive and socially inclusive. The Finnish presidency also wishes to strengthen common values and the rule of law. Human rights, freedom, democracy, equality and the rule of law are all values that EU countries commit to as part of membership. They are principles that Finland has promoted since its independence. Ladies and gentlemen, the main presidency theme of the social and health sector, the economy of well-being, contributes to our presidency goals. The economy of well-being is a holistic approach emphasizing the importance of cross-sectoral cooperation and contributing to the implementation of the UN Agenda 2030. With the economy of well-being in Finland wishes to increase understanding in the EU how inclusive growth improves people's well-being, while well-being of the population enhance not only economic growth, but also the stability of the economy and society. At the same time, with this approach, we want to ensure that no one is left behind in our rapidly changing world, and the people feel safe and cared for. After all, promoting people's well-being and safeguarding peace, security, prosperity and the rule of law are the most important tasks of the European Union. Occupational safety and health is an important part of the economy of well-being, as a cornerstone of workers' well-being and productivity. The Council conclusions on the economy of well-being were adopted by the Member States on October. The idea of putting people's well-being at the center of decision-making is also linked in the draft Council conclusions on occupational safety and health, prepared by the Finnish presidency to be adopted in December EPSCO Council. The Council conclusions on occupational safety and health will address challenges like monitoring working conditions, raising awareness, and the enforcement of occupational safety and health. Ladies and gentlemen, protecting its citizens is one of the most important functions of the European Union. One of the biggest health problems that workplaces face across Europe and in the world is work-related cancer. Cancer is causing more than 50% of work-related deaths in the EU and other developed countries as a result of exposure to carcinogens, leading around 80,000 fatalities annually. This is devastating. Roadmap on carcinogens has now been actively fighting against occupational cancer for 3 years. The purpose is to raise awareness about the risks arising from exposure to carcinogens in the workplace and exchanging good practices to prevent them. Carcinogens exposure threatens workers' health and life. It also affects their ability to participate in work and in productivity levels. This has adverse effects for companies and employers. Occupational exposure to carcinogens needs to be prevented or at least reduced. If appropriated measures are taken at workplace, the burden of carcinogens could be significantly reduced. We are working hard in the EU level to establish binding limit values for a number of cancer or mutation causing chemical agents. Finland supports actively this work and warmly welcome the effective work of the Commission on this important matter. We encourage the good cooperation to continue as we still have more work to do, and we need more efforts that go beyond limit values. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you, the roadmap partners, Austria, the Netherlands, BusinessEurope, European Trade Union Confederation, EU, OSHA, and the European Commission for initiating the Roadmap of Carcinogens campaign in the first place. Finland is very happy to be part of the roadmap, and I am more than happy to inform you that it will continue beyond 2019 as the German presidency will organize the next roadmap conference. Roadmap on carcinogens has been a joint effort for a voluntary action scheme on good practices in the prevention of work-related cancer. It has facilitated the exchange of information about good practices is an effective way to help companies and workers. The roadmap, like the economy of well-being approach, is a good example of how important it is that we put our strength together. Dear friends, I want to thank you for your contribution in this important work and for your attending this conference, either here in Helsinki or via webcast. Only by joining our efforts we can achieve our goal to reduce the burden of work-related cancers, which is also our theme today. With these words, I wish you a very pleasant stay in Helsinki and fruitful days at the conference. The fight against occupational cancer must go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you. So now just to make a few announcements and to familiarize yourself. First of all, a big thank you to our hosts. This event is jointly organized by the Finnish presidency of the European Union and the European Commission. So I think we deserve to give them a warm round of applause. Thank you. In case an alarm goes off, please take care, because some guards will come from downstairs and they will come up here. They'll be wearing high visibility jackets. It's no time to argue. Just do what you're told and follow them calmly and quietly out the door. Don't be fussing too much. Don't be running either. The assembly point is is at the back of this beautiful house in the yard there. Also downstairs you have a defibrillator, and we also have guards who know how to use first aid. And if I may say so, we still have a minister who's a nurse. So there you are. We're all set in case anything happens. Some good news, the strike is over. And for those of you who have to leave and go back either tonight or tomorrow to your respective countries, you don't have to worry. Everything is running smoothly, as it usually does in fabulous Finland. And here in Helsinki, I suppose what we're seeing is a really good example of industrial relations at work. And as we are here working very closely with the unions and the employers, we'll hear from them later. I think we're all relieved to say that obviously it worked and transport is back up and running. Personally, I'd prefer if they weren't working, because I'd really love to stay for the weekend. But there you go. Thank you to our Finnish hosts for organizing the event in this incredible building. Apparently it was finished in 1890, and it has a very checkered and colored history. But apparently, they asked the Irish person to talk about the Finnish building, but apparently on the way out, when you see that beautiful sculpture, there is in the middle of the sculpture Alexander I from Russia, who is saying, yes, we agree that Finland has the right to decide its own future and its own laws. So you know, have a look at that on your way out. So many people have commented on the different rooms. They all mean different things, because it used to be the house of the estates. We asked the organizers to put some leaflets for you in case you'd like to learn more about this building. And I think the leaflets are available outside the door in several languages. Now this house it was taken over by the Prime Minister's office, and it is used to host, dozens of conferences every year. Important things like this one, the roadmap on carcinogens and hosting important people like you. So you're part of a long tradition. Now, if you haven't understood a word I've said up until now, it's because I should have told you about the interpretation right at the start. This conference is being organized in 3 languages, so please note that we can speak English, German, or French. And you will find the headsets outside the door, and who knows when somebody might intervene in German or French, and if you're not au fait with these languages, make sure that you have the possibility for interpretation. So do please put your phone on silent. Check now so that we don't have any interruptions during the events that are to follow. I'd like to remind you that this event is being web streamed, and to our international friends who are joining in via the internet, I'd like to say a very warm welcome. We'll know later which countries have been joining in, I hope. I hope you've been spreading the word a little bit. Now, we also would like to encourage you to use social media. I mean, what can I say? It's the way forward. And we should have a slide here somewhere telling you about the hashtags we're using on Twitter, how to connect to the internet. There you are. There's the internet connection, the password, and these are the hashtags we're using on Twitter for the next 2 days. If you're a tweeter, please go ahead and don't be afraid to add photos, particularly of this very nice and historic building. There's absolutely no smoking allowed, and if you want to go outside, I think you all know the restrooms are in the basement. Oh yes, we have one very important announcement. Wim van Velen. Yeah, could you stand up, please? This guy here is called Wim van Velen. He's from the Dutch trade unions, and today is his birthday. So I hope that in the coffee break, or even better tonight, you will come over, slap him on the back, shake his hand, and wish him a happy birthday. That would be nice. The other thing I was asked to remind you, which I think is a lovely touch from our Finnish hosts, is that we have all received, or we may all receive, free passes to the museums here in Helsinki for the next 2 days. So if you haven't picked yours up already, you'll get them at the information desk or at the portal downstairs, and maybe you could make use of them because Helsinki is home to some amazing museums and art galleries that we'd love to encourage you to use. Thank you also to the presidency for giving us all our free ticket on the public transport system. I've been using it. It's a great thing to have, very thoughtful. Thank you for your gift. So, now I think if you don't have any other questions about getting out of here, getting in here, being able to understand each other, I think we might continue with our program following the intervention of the minister. Now, Tamara van Ark is the State Secretary for Social Affairs and Employment of the Dutch government. She has been a member of Parliament in the Netherlands since 2010, and since 2017 has been the State Secretary for social affairs and employment. Today we're here, and tomorrow we're here, among other things, to promote and advance the work of the Roadmap on Carcinogens, which was the brainchild of the Dutch presidency, and which, the last Dutch presidency, and which has continued over successive presidencies. We'll come back to that later, and indeed tomorrow we'll be doing some more. We'll be handing the Carcinogens roadmap even further along its journey. But right now, Tamara van Ark is not able to be with us today, but she has very kindly sent us a little message, and here it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mrs. Aino-Kaisa Pekonen, dear guests, good afternoon. First of all, I'm sorry I can't attend this interesting and important conference, but I'm glad I can join you by this video message. And I want to thank the Finnish presidency for organizing this conference. The roadmap on carcinogens and the new limit values are great instruments to increase the protection of workers in Europe against exposure to carcinogens at work. At the Dutch presidency conference in Amsterdam in 2016, we concluded that Europe lacks a basic protection level for exposure of carcinogens. Limit values for exposure of workers to carcinogens were missing. And we discussed the urgent need to set limit values for 50 of the most common carcinogens at work. And there was broad consensus on this. Since then, an enormous amount of work has been done. At this moment, 3 years after the Amsterdam conference, a third set of limit values has been published. And this means that Europe has limit values now for 25 of the most common carcinogens. And this is mainly the result of all the work done by the Commission, several presidencies and the European Parliament. I'm very grateful for that. Their efforts really have got Europe a step closer to a proper level of protection for all workers. But the job has not been done yet. We are halfway to complete our goal. There are 25 more limit values to be established, and we have to continue this road to achieve our goal. I understood that the next batch of proposals for additional protective limit values is underway, and I hope the new Commissioner will be able to bring the proposal forward to Council as soon as possible. To support implementation of these protection levels in European companies, the so-called Roadmap on Carcinogens was initiated. It collects and shares good practices throughout Europe as for preventing and reducing exposure to carcinogens at work. The roadmap was started up by joint efforts of social partners, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, the European Commission, Austria and the Netherlands, and became a fact from Amsterdam to Vienna. Soon afterwards, it became clear it would be continued under Finnish presidency. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. The roadmap has arrived in Helsinki. Important steps have been taken, but still more has to be done. I have understood future presidencies are considering to continue the roadmap, and I believe this would be a very valuable and important next step. It would mean the roadmap will find its way throughout Europe, and I hope future presidencies will bring the roadmap to a next level. And I think they will succeed in doing so. Our common goal is clear: a future European Union in which all workers are protected. A European Union free from occupational cancer. The first steps have been taken. More will have to follow. And we will have to do this together. Employers, workers, social partners, politicians, experts. And I hope the new Commissioner will continue the journey we started. We all should work together on this very important subject. Let's continue our journey so that a new generation will not suffer from cancer from work. I wish you a great conference. And once again, I would like to thank the Finnish presidency for organizing it.
Thank you very much. Brigitte Zarfl is the Minister of Labour, Social Affairs, Health and Consumer Protection from Austria. That looks even a wider portfolio than the Finnish minister, but who knows how they're organized. And she also is not in a position to be here today, but she very kindly sent you all this message.
Dear Minister Pekonen, dear State Secretary Böhning, dear Director Olsen, ladies and gentlemen. I've been extremely pleased to be invited to this very important conference that is dedicated to one of the key issues in the area of occupational safety and health, namely the fight against occupational cancer. I find it all the more regrettable that I cannot join you in person. For Austria, as one of the members that established the roadmap for carcinogens, the fight against work-related cancer has been and still is of great importance. During our EU presidency in 2018, we focused that topic at EU level. At national level, we have carried out targeted projects. We all succeeded that the roadmap has continued beyond Vienna. I want to thank again Finland, but also Germany, for carrying on this very important joint project. In Austria, we knew from the beginning that we have to work together if we, in the long run, want to reach the goal of reducing the number of occupational cancer cases and preventing new cases. Together means all actors in occupational safety and health, the labor inspection, social insurance sector, social partners, and not to forget the persons responsible in the companies and at the workplaces, especially the employers. To give some examples, the Austrian Labor Inspection has carried out a combined information and inspection campaign. Labor inspectors visited 600 companies and informed not only employers, but also workers about safe handling of carcinogenic substances. The Austrian Workers' Compensation Board, the social insurance for occupational risks, has provided about 100,000 consultations, enabling people to recognize carcinogenic substances at work and suggesting practice-oriented solutions. In all the discussions, it became evident that many people didn't even know that they had been working with carcinogenic substances. Furthermore, it could be seen that a third of the visited companies had no knowledge about the extent of the exposure. But only the knowledge about these hazards enables employers to set the right protective measures. With all the joint activities of the last 2 years, we have succeeded in Austria to raise the awareness in the companies for the hazards. Carcinogens at work have been substituted by less dangerous substances, but also the amount of substances used could be reduced. Even though we have impressive numbers of success, it is the concrete examples that gives motivation for continuing this work. Examples of companies that actively asked for support to improve working conditions of their employees because of the campaign. We also have examples where producers changed their products and production. It is important now to continue along the same path. With the EU legislation on carcinogens, Europe takes significant steps to further protection of people against carcinogenic substances. These new legal provisions are a valuable stimulus for much needed further activities. I wish you all an informative conference and success with the further development of the roadmap.
Thank you, and many of you here will remember the conference we had in Vienna on the same topic when the Austrian presidency also pledged its absolutely irreplaceable support. And now, as we're going to be handing over the roadmap to its next keepers, we have a very nice message as well from Björn, who is State Secretary from Germany, who has also sent us a little message on video.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would have liked to have accepted Minister Mattila's invitation and be with you today in the beautiful city of Helsinki. Unfortunately, other commitments prevent me from doing so. But thanks to technology, I am still able to give my welcoming address, if only from a distance. As the current Finnish presidency draws to a close, Germany is preparing for its presidency in the second half of 2020. We too attach great importance to protecting employees' health and safety at work. This is an area where the use of dangerous carcinogenic substances supposes a considerable challenge. This is why I very much welcome the roadmap on carcinogens, so we can take joint action at European level to mitigate the risks involved. Since its entry into force in May 2016, the agreed roadmap has been taken up and implemented by many. In addition to the signatory states, 70 member states have shown their support by joining the roadmap group of friends. Today, Germany takes over the baton from Finland, and we will follow the roadmap as we go. And as we move forward, Germany will support the initiative to take the roadmap beyond 2019. The roadmap's main aim is to include in the Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive, the CMD, the top 50 most toxic carcinogenic substances with associated limits and thresholds. So far, we have achieved this for 25 of the 50 substances involved. This is, of course, a huge success. But with another 25 substances on the agenda, we still have a long way to go. We all know that setting limits for carcinogenic substances poses a scientific challenge. Health-related limits and thresholds can only be set for a few of these toxic substances. And as we also come into contact with carcinogens in other areas of life, we are all exposed to certain cancer risk. This is why, when it comes to setting limits and thresholds, we should consider a risk debate. These and other exciting issues and topics will be addressed as part of the program for today's event. Despite the great successes achieved, there are many questions that remain unanswered. This is why we must pool our efforts to ensure continued joint action against work-related cancer. In many member states, protection of workers who work with dangerous carcinogenic substances is also promoted outside the roadmap at national level. Germany, for example, has implemented a risk-related protection program. We should coordinate our initiatives. Germany is pleased to be able to play an active role in those efforts during its presidency. One particular building block will be the planned roadmap event. It will provide a platform on which we present the progress achieved so far. But more importantly, it will be used to identify and analyze existing deficits in order to develop new activities and find solutions to protect employees against carcinogens at work. We are planning an interesting and varied program for that event. One we hope will provide stimulus for future activities in the joint fight against work-related cancer. Please accept our invitation to join us in Dortmund in November 2020. But enough of the future, now I'm back to present. I am confident that today's event in Helsinki will bring us one step closer to achieving the roadmap's goal. I wish you all every success.
So thank you very much to the member states for organising the sending of those videos. It was really nice to hear from them. And now I'd like to introduce our representative from the European Commission, Charlotte Grevfors Arnaud. I have to say we're making Charlotte work very hard while she's here, because on the one hand she will be making an introductory speech from the Commission in the opening session, but she's also going to go in later in a more in-depth, if you like, look at what has been achieved so far. Charlotte has a legal background. She is, of course, from Sweden, and since 2005, she is working with the European unit. She is now the head of unit of the health and safety part of the European Commission, which is based, as many of you know, in Luxembourg. And after Charlotte and the social partners have spoken, if you like, we can take a few minutes to ask them questions. But that will be a little bit later, because first we have another little video to show you. But right now, I'd like to ask you, Charlotte, to come to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Dear national authorities representatives, dear delegates, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely pleased to be here on behalf of the European Commission today to celebrate this important event of the roadmap on carcinogens and its achievements. 3 years have passed since the Dutch presidency took the initiative to be the promoter of this voluntary action scheme, aiming to raise awareness and promote exchange of good practices to prevent exposure to carcinogens at the workplace. This is a very welcomed initiative on which the European Commission is a signatory. I am delighted that it has been supported so actively by other member states, as we heard in the welcome messages. And I would really like to thank them all and thank you all for your commitment. The roadmap sets the good example. It is rightly ambitious, aiming for high standards of working conditions. It helps organizations to reach those high standards through sharing best practices. It helps companies which have not yet reached adequate level of protection to assess good and cost-efficient measures specifically conceived for carcinogenic substances. This commitment is more than justified when it comes to fighting cancer. We need to set the bar high. Let's not forget, at 52 of all work-related deaths, cancer remains the biggest killer in the workplace. It is a shared concern, and it has been a top priority for this European Commission over the last years. Action taken in the past 5 years have been based on some key principles and challenges. First, the European Pillar on Social Rights underpins our priorities for fighting cancer at the workplace. A healthier and safer workplace is a core principle of the European Pillar of Social Rights. Secondly, inspired and driven by the challenges identified in the EU strategic framework from 2014 until 2020, we have taken action to address prevention of work-related diseases. And specifically, the Commission communication on safer and healthier work for all has further focused our attention on stepping up the fight against occupational cancer. Based on this, over the last years, we have undertaken an extensive revision of the health and safety directives. This has led to an unprecedented modernization of our acquis in the field of occupational health and safety. In particular, we have adopted a fourth and also a fifth list of indicative exposure limit values under the Chemicals Agents Directive, and we have delivered 3 amendments of the Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive. I will have the opportunity to cover this a little bit more in depth a little bit later. These 3 amendments of the Carcinogens Directive set new occupational exposure limit values for 26 substances, and they will improve working conditions for around 40 million workers and help save the lives of more than 100 workers over the next 50 years. We are already working on a 4th amendment addressing even more important substances. In practical terms, this means that millions of workers who in their daily work can be exposed to dangerous agents will be better protected. In particular, the new provisions imply very specific prevention and protective measures to be taken by the employers, further to a detailed risk assessment. The establishment of limit values provides a compliance benchmark. This contributes to a level playing field in form of EU-wide minimum requirements of protection. It also improves clarity regarding how exposure should be controlled in different member states. Ultimately, it represents a clear improvement for health and safety of workers. In reaching these achievements, I cannot overstate the contribution of the Tripartite Advisory Committee on Safety and Health, and I see some of its members here among you in the audience. In this committee, the social partners and member states have actively given their opinion on the limit values proposed. Prevention is a dynamic process. It takes into account the need for worker protection in an evolving workplace. It benefits from emerging technologies. And importantly, prevention is fed by new scientific knowledge. And in this regard, I would like to highlight the importance also of the RAC committee, composed of high-level scientific experts working within the European Agency for Chemicals, based here in Helsinki. This agency, which was set up to deal with REACH regulations, now supports and provides scientific opinions which also allow the OSH legislation to align with new scientific evidence. Furthermore, there are aspects of the REACH regulation that can support OSH in protecting workers' health, and indeed one of today's workshops is dedicated to this very interesting subject. I would also like to highlight the role of another agency, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, EU-OSHA, which is based in Bilbao. EU-OSHA plays a key role in implementing EU-OSH policy priorities. OSHA promotes practical tools and guidelines for prevention. It plays a key role in awareness raising, especially facilitating prevention strategies in small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the backbone of the economy for many member states. And in fact, we celebrated just a few weeks ago the closure of a very successful Healthy Workplace campaign on dangerous substances organized by exactly EU-OSHA. Legislation needs to be followed up through effective implementation at the workplace. The shared goal in fighting occupational cancer is only possible with a comprehensive approach where legislation and non-legislative measures go hand in hand. And that is why the roadmap is so relevant. It is a catalyst for more tripartite collaboration, for mutual learning between member states on measures that most successfully prevent cancer at the workplace. The agenda of this conference is full of intervention and insights with dedicated workshops. And from the Commission side, we are also very eager to hear more about these insights and sharing of knowledge and experience. I wish you all an interesting and fruitful 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Now, as I said, we're going to hear from Charlotte again in a little while. We're going to do a little overview of where we are and what comes next. But what we'd like to do now is to have a worldwide premiere of a video clip that has not yet been seen by anybody outside of this room, other than the Dutch colleagues who get to see everything. And I just to remind you, what we're launching here is the new animated video that will accompany the roadmap on the next leg of its journey. So this will be the third animated video conceived as a means of promoting the idea of the roadmap to the public and, if you like, explaining it and encouraging people to get involved in the roadmap. The first such animated video was born in Amsterdam back in May 2016, coming towards the end of the Dutch presidency, because of course the Dutch presidency, working closely with the EU, were the geniuses who came up with the whole idea of the roadmap on carcinogens. And so you will have seen the first animated video there. Then fast forward on to Vienna 2018, when the Austrians threw their weight behind the journey of the roadmap and agreed to keep the topic of carcinogens in the workplace at the top of the political agenda, and made a very strong statement in doing so. There we had a second animated video. And now we have the support of Finland, which is of course a wonderful thing. And for first time ever seen in the whole world and globally, we now want to show you, as we announce that we will hand over tomorrow the roadmap on its journey as far as Berlin, the next but one presidency of the European Union. Now, the message contained in this animation is, well, let's say the objective of the animation is that you and your organizations will take it and use it as a promotional tool, that you will go out there and spread it and show it to as many people as you can. The message, of course, is that we are all on the right road with this roadmap, but there is still a lot of road to go, a lot of road to travel. And there are many different pieces to the puzzle, and we can all play our different parts depending on, well, according to the Dutch, where in the puzzle we are located, which is clever, I think. And you'll see here in this video, the Germans now get a very big piece of the puzzle because, of course, they're taking over the presidency after Croatia, and they have agreed to do a lot of work with this for us and for you. So really, this is a call for help. It's a call for you to take this back to your respective countries, to ask yourself the question, what part of the puzzle am I? And to let your networks know that they too have a place to play in the puzzle. Thank you.
More than half of work-related deaths are associated with exposure to cancer-causing agents at work. In the European Union, We're talking about more than 100,000 deaths every year, almost 270 workers per day. This is beyond shocking. These deaths are preventable, so why do we allow workers to continue to be exposed? It has to come to an end. It has to stop. Europe needs to be aware of the risks of exposure to carcinogens. Employers and workers have to take responsibility and act accordingly to prevent exposure. And businesses need to play their part. All of us should contribute with facts, clear regulations, and dedicated solutions, and enforce compliance through inspections. But Europe is on the move, and we've already passed some important milestones, with the adoption of new EU-wide occupational exposure limits for dozens of carcinogenic substances, the development of solutions and the exchange of knowledge during events throughout Europe, the running of the European Healthy Workplaces campaign on dangerous substances, the largest OSH awareness-raising campaign in the world, the roadmap on carcinogens, with over 1,000 friends and more than half of EU member states involved, helping businesses and publishing solutions and fact sheets, and Labour inspectorates carrying out dedicated inspections on working with dangerous substances. Time flies. The first leg of the roadmap took us from Amsterdam to Vienna and was scheduled to end in 2019. But Europe is still on the move, and we need to fill more gaps. Member states are continuing to step forward to help and to add their piece to the puzzle. The roadmap is now continuing from Helsinki to Berlin and will go even further if needed. This is the time for action. This is the time to be heard. We need to get more people on board. More businesses and workers need to be convinced to take measures and prevent exposure. We call upon sectoral and other organizations to help spread the word and tailor solutions. We call upon governments and social partners to give national priority to the prevention of exposure of carcinogens. We call upon researchers and experts to develop practical interventions and innovations to protect our workers. We call upon managers and workers to spread awareness and demand action and measures. We call upon you to make this happen and to get involved. Join in, get active, and follow the roadmap now.
So thank you very much. I think it's really well done to our Dutch colleagues for coming up with all of those good ideas in the video. One thing that was said there, it doesn't have to end in Berlin. And if it gets the political support of the next EU presidencies, then maybe in Berlin you could be handing it over to somebody else. So I'm thinking about maybe the French presidency, maybe the Portuguese presidency, or maybe the Slovenians. I know that our colleagues from Germany are here today, and if any of you from France, Slovenia or Portugal are here present and you want to have a chat, that's why we have networking breaks. So networking coffees. So if any of you want to touch base about bringing the roadmap beyond Berlin and taking it beyond 2020, then you have plenty of opportunity to do it here and indeed in the future by contacting any of the signatory organizations. So now I'd like to go back again and invite Charlotte back up onto the stage. Charlotte is filling in more ways than one for your colleague Stefan Olsen, who was unable to come. But I know that he will be here tomorrow. Yeah, so we'll, again, I'd remind you that after the next session with the social partners, if you have questions for Charlotte or the social partners, we'll have some time to take them at the end before we break for coffee. So the floor is yours, and thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brendan. Yes, you have to bear with me for another few minutes. I would like to go a little bit more in depth on exactly what has been done and how we are working together on this very important issue. If we are starting to look at why there is a need to act, we heard already in many messages from the other member states, and I mentioned it also myself, cancer is the first cause of work-related deaths in the EU, with 52%, and 24 is what you see is coming next after, the circulatory diseases. So it is very clear that it is really the first very important factor we need to address. It was mentioned also the number of more than 100,000 deaths. Here we have a more exact number, but it's still very clear, and that is probably also why we feel the very strong desire from all stakeholders to work on this and to establish the occupational exposure limit values to these carcinogenic and mutagenic substances. It was also clear when we heard the President-elect of the European Commission. As we speak, there is a hearing in the European Parliament, so I am not going to make any announcements now, but as you know, it's done. Very good, so then it's done. We have then, I would expect the new Commission starting from the 1st of December. And then I would like to read out to you what the next President of the European Commission has established as her priority. Almost all of us will know the anxiety and grief of a friend or family member diagnosed with cancer. Survival rates are on the up, especially thanks to early detection and screening programs, but there is a lot more we can do. I will put forward a European plan to fight cancer to support member states in improving cancer control and care. And this is what we are going to do for the coming years with the new Commission. And of course, prevention of occupational cancer is key to fight the cancer on the more general level as well. And now let's have a look where we are. We have here nicely put what this Commission has done. I would like to take a step back and remind you that it all started back in last century, actually 89, with the Framework Directive on Health and Safety at Work, which laid down the general principles of prevention, of risk assessment, and based on this Framework Directive, the directive, of course, on carcinogens was adopted in 2004. And already in that directive, we have clear protective measures. We have a hierarchy of protection with substitution, with working in closed systems when we deal with these substances, in giving privilege to collective protective equipment and measures, and then personal protective equipment, if that is not possible, and then on the side, of course, having clear occupational limit values. And it's true that the first core directive on carcinogens contained some of them, and the major work which was done under this Commission has been to go and to revise to make sure that we now have 26 substances addressed. So there was this first batch that worked with 13 substances, and some of them are really big substances, like chromium-6, like silica, like hardwood dust, and then the second with 8 more substances, including diesel, and the third batch, which dealt with substances like formaldehyde, cadmium, and beryllium. And as mentioned also earlier, the work is ongoing. And we are now preparing and working on a fourth batch with yet 3 more substances. And these ones have been discussed and agreed and prioritized within the frame of the Advisory Committee on Safety and Health and the specific working group who is dealing with chemicals. And they are acrylonitrile, benzene, and nickel compounds, also substances that are used widely at workplaces and really coming close to many, many workers. So to give you the very exact timeline on this work is that we had already the scientific assessment done by the ECHA's RAC committee. It was completed last year in March. Then we had the Working Party on Chemicals in the Advisory Committee who proposed the draft opinion, which was adopted this year in June. And we have also had an external study to support us, to support the Commission in preparing an impact assessment, because that is what we need to do internally in this procedure. And this study has been also monitored and followed by the Advisory Committee's specific group. And now, since it's closed, we are doing the internal work of preparing this impact assessment. Once it's done, it will be shared with all the other parts of the Commission services and will need to be presented to the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, which is an internal board of the Commission, and to obtain a positive opinion from this board. The next step is then that the Commission would put forward the Commission proposal. We are aiming for the third quarter of next year. And if it is then successfully adopted, we'll then follow the ordinary procedure for adoption in Council and European Parliament. But just to let you know what is going on also, more than just these limit values, is very intensive work related to the legally binding requests from the co-legislators that the Commission received within the frame of these 3 earlier amendments of the Carcinogens Directive. Indeed, within the trialogues and within the discussions, in order to have these 3 amendments adopted, there were requests and agreements to look closer to reprotoxic substances. So here we have carried out a study, and the results of this study are being discussed within the Working Party on Chemicals. There was also an additional request, also in the trialogues, to look closer at medicinal products used at the workplace, thinking more specifically on cytotoxic drugs. And here as well, a lot of work is being put into that, because of course these legally binding requests must be addressed. But having spoken about legally binding requests and legislation, I would also like to recall what Marianne Thyssen, our Commissioner, has said more than once: legislation alone is not enough. Indeed, in order to improve the enforcement and implementation at the workplace, in particular in small and micro enterprises, just to have laws and directives will not be enough. And that is exactly why the Roadmap initiative has been so successful as a complement, as raising awareness and as making sure that we really reach out the policy and the legislation which is laid down in this text. So we see the exchange of best practices among business, governments and workers' organizations within the roadmap that we are looking at today. But also I would like to highlight other examples of these exchanges. For example, the social partner agreements that can be done among European social partners, for example, on NEPSI agreement on silica in 2006. And of course, as we also heard earlier, important campaigns carried out by the agency in Bilbao, like the one on dangerous substances that just closed. And since we will have then the opportunity to answer and ask questions later, I will perhaps stop here for now, but if you think about things you would like to ask me, I'm really happy to reply when we have that question session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. So now I'd like to ask both social partners to come on the stage. Bring a chair. And also one for Charlotte, who will come up later on. Thank you for helping me. That's teamwork. Thank you. And if you sit here, Per, we'll listen to, first of all, Jessie. So, Jessie is Business Europe's advisor responsible for industrial relations. Sorry, Jessie Fernandes, I should have said. Pardon, there's a mistake in your last name.
Fine.
Right, did you write the slide?
No.
No, okay. I apologize for the mistake in your name. Labour law, she's responsible for industrial relations, labour law, working conditions, including occupational safety and health. And before joining Business Europe, Jessie worked for the European Federation of Cleaning Industries and also in the European Economic and Social Committee. Having listened to about so much that's going on in the area, I'm very interested to hear what the employers and the trade unions have to say about what they've heard so far today and where they think we're going in the future. So, Jessie, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here.
Brenda. So, hello everyone. As Brenda said, I work currently at Business Europe. It's been 1 year and a half. So I'm responsible for health and safety, and I'm really happy to be here today with you, alongside with my colleague from the trade union organization, Pelle, to discuss together how we can better fight occupational cancer. I would like to start with thanking the Finnish presidency for organizing this really important conference that gathered the main stakeholders involved in the fight against cancer. Thank you for your commitment in helping social partners and public authorities at EU and national levels to promote solutions to address workers' exposure to dangerous substances. I would like to stress that Business Europe is committed to providing good working conditions for workers, which of course include promoting workers' health and safety at the workplace in all the European Union. Good health and safety performance is not only crucial for employees' health, it is also essential for companies. It ensures business continuity and competitiveness, avoiding high level of absence and loss of really skilled workers. It also contributes to having productive and healthy workforce and improve as well the well-being in the workplace. As the Finnish ministry said, well-being was an important priority of the Finnish presidency. However, health and safety also ensure a level playing field for all companies in Europe and avoid a race to the bottom when it comes to standards. However, I need to emphasize as an employer's representative today that it is important to ensure that measures not only protect workers but are also proportionate and respect the equilibrium between costs and benefits, which means that the administrative burden for company should always be taken into consideration when proposing new measures, and especially because, as Charlotte says, more than 90% of our companies in the EU are small and medium enterprises with really limited resources. Business Europe has been supporting of the work of the European Commission to revise the directive on carcinogens and mutagen substances and to include new binding occupational exposure limit for additional substances. Today, I'm not only speaking in the behalf of Business Europe, but also as the coordinator of the employer group in the EU OSHA agency, which is located in Bilbao. And I'm also the coordinator in the employers' interest group in the advisory committee for health and safety that was mentioned by Charlotte earlier. So the advisory committee, as well as the Bilbao agencies, are tripartite bodies that advise the Commission on health and safety legislation. In my opinion, and in the opinion of my employer, this is the right framework for social partners to collaborate and work together to ensure the fight against occupational cancer at EU level. Employers fully support the work that has been undertaken by the Working Party on Chemical and the Advisory Committee at large to adopt opinion on new substances. It is crucial when we adopt this opinion to respect the compromise that have been elaborated between the three groups of interests, which mean between the employers, the worker, and the governments. It is important to find a balanced compromise when we adopt new binding occupational exposure limit values that are not only protective for workers, but also easily implementable by employers and feasible. Not only it is important to adopt binding occupational exposure limits that protect employees, but it's also important that it is feasible to measure those binding limit values. The adoption of such limit values must be based on science and not on fear, and we fully support the current procedure that is based on impact assessment of costs and benefits and scientific evidence. It is really important to consult with all relevant stakeholders to build a broad consensus and understanding. Now that the Scientific Committee for Occupational Exposure Limits call no longer exists, and that is now ECA and RAC that have the task to conduct the scientific study, it is still important that the opinion of social partners is taken into consideration and that the work of the Advisory Committee on Health and Safety is respected. Opinion of the Advisory Committee are of utmost importance when it goes to cooperation between the social partner to fight against occupational cancer. We are happy that currently work is being undertaken on lead, which has been identified by the European Commission as the main reprotoxic substances, and we support a more binding, a more stringent measure under RAC. It is also really important that the European Parliament, when it goes to co-legislative procedure, respect the opinion of the Advisory Committee and the consensus that was built between social partners and not go beyond what was decided in the tripartite body. Another really important body for employers is, of course, EU OSHA, and Krista here and Brenda are representative of the institution. I want to thank them for the good work that has been done on the Healthy Workplace campaign, and especially the one on fighting against dangerous substances that was closed, as mentioned previously, 2 years ago in Bilbao. It was a really successful event and good practices were showcased over there. Businesses and various sectoral employers organizations were supportive of this campaign, and we were partners of the campaign. We had an event in Business Europe last year in November where Brenda took part in, during which employers' organizations from both sectoral and national employers' organizations discussed best practices and exchange on the good work they've been undertaking to fight occupational cancer and workers' exposure to carcinogen substances. Finally, last but not least, considering the event today. Business Europe is an active part in the roadmap against carcinogens since 2016. The roadmap and the campaigns are crucial activities to raise awareness of employers and employees of the danger of carcinogen substances. By really simple procedure at the workplace level, human life can be saved, and there is no small or big gesture that should be overlooked. The roadmap and the campaign gave employers and employees valuable tools that can be used on the everyday life to fight against exposure to dangerous substances. This is why I'm really happy to have the roadmap extended today, and that other presidencies will support this initiative. We now know that we have a new commission, and we are waiting for the new either strategy or strategic framework of the European Commission and the plan on cancer as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discuss it later with you and Charlotte and Pelle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you very much, Jessie. Now I'd like to invite Pelle Hilmersson to take the podium, please. He was elected as Deputy General Secretary of the ETUC in the last ETUC Congress in 2019 in Vienna. He used to work for the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, and he is, of course, a veteran in Brussels, well known in the Brussels landscape, having worked for the Party of European Socialists, having worked for the Commission, the European Parliament, and indeed the Economic and Social Committee. And in the ETUC, he's responsible for a lot of things, for employment, for mobility, for posting of workers, for regional affairs, for occupational safety and health, to name just a few. There are more. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brenda. I see that is my name, so that's correct. But I've been introduced as Pelle, which is correct as well, because it's my nickname, but the name I prefer to be called. It's only my parents calling me Per when they're angry with me. It's a pleasure to be here. I represent the European Trade Union Confederation, and we were among the 6 founders of this roadmap on carcinogens in 2016. And of course, we fully support the objective of this roadmap to raise awareness about the risks arising from exposure of carcinogens in the workplace and to exchange good practices. It shows the willingness of the signatories to work together to stop occupational cancer. And this is crucial. We've heard it. We've seen it on the slides and in the videos that in the EU, more than 50% of work-related deaths are due to cancer. That's over 100,000 deaths per year. And the human suffering is, of course, great, but also the costs for society and companies. So this is an important issue, a key issue of common concern for the EU, for member states, and for the social partners. The ETUC's overall objective is to prevent and eliminate occupational cancer. At our Congress in May this year, we called for a vision of zero work-related cancer to be included in the future EU strategy on occupational safety and health. And of course, also by further revision of the directive on carcinogens and mutagens at work, including an extension of the scope of the directive to include reprotoxic substances. Because approximately 2 to 3 million workers in the EU are exposed to reprotoxicants. Carcinogens, mutagens, and reprotoxic substances share common characteristics. So the workplace prevention of these substances of very high concern should be organized in a homogeneous and consistent manner, so in the same directive. Moreover, we still need action on asbestos, nanomaterials, night work, and endocrine disruptors, with clear targets and enforcement strategies. And all strategies should, of course, include gender aspects in preventing work-related cancers. The employer's obligations in terms of prevention is of course key, where they should follow the principle of substitution whenever possible and keeping exposure to dangerous substances as low as technically possible. But the joint work of the social partners is also very important. In 2018, the ETUC and Industrial, so a federation of ours, together with the European Chemical Employers Group and the European Chemical Industry Council, made a joint call on the European Commission to include reprotoxic substances in the CMD directive. In a joint declaration, we stated that one directive covering carcinogens, mutagens and reprotoxicants at the workplace would be a solid basis for harmonized EU-wide minimum requirements. This agreement was important because it showed that employers and unions are working together to reduce chemical exposure at work and therefore also reproductive damages and work-related cancer. The agreement was also in line with the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights and proved that social dialogue is alive and kicking in Europe and delivering protections for workers. The ETUC also calls for the occupational exposure limits on carcinogens to cover the large majority of exposures and should be regularly revised. The current European Commission has done important progress in this field. The Commission proposed 25 binding occupational exposure limit values, which is a significant difference with the lack of ambition shown by previous Commission. And we're expecting the incoming Commission, elected today, to continue this work. The ETUC is calling for at least 50 binding limitations. And here again, I have an example from good cooperation between the social partners. After the adoption of a binding occupational exposure limit on formaldehydes in the third batch of the revision of the CMD directive, employers and trade unions at EU level, namely CEFIC, Pharmacare, ECEG, ETUC and Industrial, are now discussing a voluntary agreement to implement the limit values across the whole formaldehyde value chain earlier than the deadline foreseen in the directive, which is July 2021. As an independent activity of the trade unions, the campaign against occupational cancers has been intense in many European countries, where substitution as a first response has been highlighted. Just let me give you one example, and that is the ongoing campaign of the European Biosafety Network to reduce the exposition to exposure to cyclostatic substances in the health sector. This campaign has resulted in the Madrid regional government passing a law to protect the health and safety of healthcare workers, which minimize the occurrences of exposure through the establishment of guidelines and a unified record and monitoring system for exposure to the most relevant group of hazardous drugs to which nurses are exposed, especially in the field of cancer treatment. Another example of the joint work of social partners is the EU Social Dialogue Agreement in the hairdressing sector, which places a lot of emphasis on chemical risks. It is known to be one of the sectors where occupational cancers are generally underestimated. The social partners in the sector are now developing an action plan aimed at the autonomous implementation of the agreements. It's been mentioned before, but I'll say it as well, that the social partners at EU level, we cooperate very well in the bodies of EU OSHA and in the advisory committee on the occupational safety and health. EU OSHA is an extremely important platform for the cooperation of social partners, but also governments and the Commission. And the ETUC thinks that it shows 25 years of well-working tripartite agency, and it's still a unique opportunity for us to shape a common information and research OSH environment in the EU. When it comes to the advisory committee, it's of course also very important because it contributes to developing the EU agenda. The committee has called for a new EU OSH strategic framework to succeed the current one, which expires next year, and for it to include work-related cancer. So this is an important signal. And the ETUC followed up on this By just a couple of weeks ago, our executive committee adopted a position on this, on the new EU strategy on occupational safety and health, including commitments regarding occupational cancer. And it's our hope that the Finnish presidency will be able to convince the ministers in the EPSCO Council on the 10th of December to deliver clear conclusions on this. And for me to conclude, the roadmap is about awareness, but also a useful tool to share best practices. And actually I went on the website yesterday to have a look, and one of the first, on the website of the roadmap, and one of the first examples was actually an initiative by social partners. It was in the Netherlands, where the Dutch social partners in the construction sector working together on the reduction of diesel motor emissions. So very interesting examples to share there. The roadmap is very important. It encourages us all to continue learning, exchanging best practices, and take concrete action together and in cooperation. It constitutes, in my view, a zero vision on work related to cancer, as the ETUC is calling for. So let's continue this work, important work together. I'm looking forward to signing the covenant tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Charlotte, may I ask you to join us up here? Do we have another mic for the... We do. Very good. Thank you very much, all of you. So now, over to you. We're going to have a very busy day tomorrow, and we're not going to have much time, and you're all going into workshops soon. So would anybody like to ask a question either to the social partners or to Charlotte from the European Commission? Yes, please, Gertrude, if you'd like to say your name.
Can you hear me? Is it on? Yeah. Gertrude Breindl from the Austrian Ministry of Labor. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My question goes to all, I think, to all three, but perhaps especially to Charlotte. You mentioned in your presentation the idea of the upcoming Commission on an European EU plan on fighting cancer. Are there ideas that OSH has an important part of this EU plan, and how will you, what inputs will be by the European social partners? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, would you like to answer? The microphone is right beside you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Yes, as we all know, we are now in the transition period, even though we will have very, very soon the new Commission in place. And the announcement made by the President-elect is indeed her intention. So for the time being, we cannot say that there are very specific, concrete actions, but certainly preparatory meetings have taken place and there have been exchanges, and it's clear that this fight action plan is really going to be covering all areas. So public health, environment, but also, as you mentioned, clearly an aspect on OSH. And the work we are carrying out in preparing for a fourth batch would fit in there quite nicely. But once again, I think we need to wait until the president is actually in place, and then there will be the very concrete outcome of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question. Wim, please. Just take the microphone. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question to Charlotte again. Sorry. Charlotte, as you know, we have now a limit value on diesel emission in Europe, and it will be 50 milligram and microgram, of course. Sorry, thank you for the interruption. Dutch employers know everything. But the question is, no, the situation is that if I have to explain to my members that Europe is making a limit value for diesel emission of 50 microgram, my members are not very happy with it. So I go to the scientists in the Netherlands and I ask, what is the health effect of 50 microgram for diesel emission? And all these scientists tell me there is no health effect on 50 microgram because it's much too high. You will never make an employee, a worker, happy with 50 microgram diesel emission limit value. So, can you give me advice how to make my members happy with limit values like this? Because that's very difficult. Now in the Netherlands, we have very constructive negotiations with the employers. And we hope in the beginning of January we will have a binding limit value of 10 microgram in the Netherlands. So that's 5 times lower than in Europe. So, and I think it is, that's the, let's say, the dark side of European limit values, that it cannot be the case that those countries who have lower values, the motivation will disappear to lower further because there is a European limit value which is much too high. So how can we guarantee that in those member states who have lower values, the development of going further down is not blocked by Europe? That's the first question. And how can I make my members happy with these kind of values?
So I think I have to congratulate Wim twice. First on his birthday, no? And secondly on the good work done in the Netherlands for the limit value. But yes, I think you're touching an important point, but there are several replies to it. One, and the first one is legal. It's not perhaps the most exciting one, but it's true that in the area of health and safety at work, we are dealing at EU level on minimum requirements. It's like that. It's in the treaties. So we are working to make sure that in Europe we have a level which is harmonized on a minimum level. And then member states are always encouraged to go further, to protect better, to do more. And from the Commission side, we are very attached to the excellent work done in the Advisory Committee, and I really think that that is where you should put all your efforts, because if the Advisory Committee that really involves all the member states, all the workers and all the employers can agree on a limit value, which is as low as possible, then that would be the way forward. And then one final point, let's not forget, I mentioned the core directive. We are speaking now on occupational limit values, and that's very good that we are adopting new ones and going ahead. But the core directive says already that the exposure should be as low as possible. So even without limit values, this legal obligation is there. Limit values are there as a tool to help labor inspectors, to help employers. But this legal obligation to always go as low as possible is in the directive.
Thank you, Charlotte. Did anybody else in the panel want to react to that question? Yeah, her, please.
No, the last question, it's a very important one, and actually the ETUC has reacted on member states recently lowering existing standards while implementing revised CMD directive. They're lowering the protection of workers, and this is of course, as Charlotte says, the EU only established minimum values, but it doesn't mean, or minimum requirements, but it doesn't mean that member states should decrease their protections to workers if they already have existing better rules or limits. So that's very important that we send this signal, I think, to member states that they should keep, they shouldn't lower protections just because the EU limits is higher.
Thank you. Jessie, did you want to say anything on that?
I'm not really sure, but initially diesel exhaustion was not included in your proposal, Charlotte, of the Commission.
It wasn't included in that batch,
No, it wasn't. So it was actually...
It was prepared for the second batch.
Yeah, so it was the Parliament including that. So once again, I mean, that's what I said during my presentation, is the Parliament going further what is foreseen by the Commission and going ahead of what would have been decided in the Advisory Committee for Health and Safety. So I think there is a procedure here in place in the Advisory Committee on Health and Safety, and the Commission is doing its job. We're doing scientific assessment, and then when the Parliament goes further and jump ahead, that can be one of the response of this problem with diesel exhaustion. I never can say that, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Tony, you wanted to ask a question. Just say your name, Tony, when you take the microphone.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Musu from ETUC, and I have a question for Jessie. And the question is on the reprotox substances. As Pelle explained, so the trade unions are pushing to have an extension of the scope of the CMD to also cover reprotoxic substances. And as you know, we have also an agreement between ETUC and the employers of the chemical sector, ECEG, and also CEFIC has signed this joint agreement to extend the scope to the reprotox. And my question to you is, do you think that the other employers, and BusinessEurope is representing all employers in Europe, can in the future join that agreement? Thank you.
Yes, we're well aware of this agreement that was signed between a cross-industry organization and a sectoral employers. So, first of all, in my opinion, and you know about that, on a procedural point of view, it's kind of difficult for us because we were kind of taken by surprise about this declaration. So it's not that we, for now, oppose to joining it. It's just that it takes a bit more time because it's not just the chemical sector that is impacted by this. It's also all the user of the chemicals. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed, and it takes longer to have an agreement among various sectors than to go directly to the chemical that produce the products and then don't really use them in practice, first of all. Second of all, we are not in favor of including largely substances to the CMD, but rather to go substances by substances. And as I said during my presentation, the Commission is currently working on lead, which is the main reprotoxic substances that I've been identifying. So work is being done. It's just that we need time. We need to go through the procedure and not to jump directly to conclusions, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Jessie. So, anybody else? Yes, we have a question here at the back. Just say your name, please.
Hello, I'm Tiina Santonen from Finnish Institute of Occupational Health. So, we heard about the progress that has been done by this far with the four amendment of Carcinogens and Mutagens directive. On the other hand, we also heard that there is quite a lot of work still to be done to cover additional more than 20 chemicals to reach the target of 50 chemicals. What we haven't heard by this far is what are the plans to cover these additional substances. Is there already some work going on in Commission to cover these substances, and in which kind of time frame can we expect that these are covered?
Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. I thought that I mentioned it when I was presenting a little bit what we are preparing for. Indeed, there is this ongoing preparation for additional substances. Work has already advanced. As I mentioned, another batch amendment of the Carcinogens Directive we are hoping to put forward, if everything goes well, already next year. Then, as I also mentioned, there are the work going on the reprotoxic side. We heard very strong views here from the workers and also views from the employers. This is something that we are working a lot. There is still no agreement in the Working Party on Chemicals on the Advisory Committee, so the discussions are very intense. And then, as I mentioned, also work on cytotoxic drugs. So I think that it's quite clear that we are working very hard and having quite a lot on our plate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it looks like, oh, excuse me, sorry, we have one more question. Jukka Takala.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Charlotte, and the employers and workers representatives for excellent presentation. I come from the International Commission of Occupational Health, but I have a bit longer background in my history in the European Union and elsewhere as well. My comment and question here is that I'm very happy of the numbers that you presented over here, and I'm happy to tell that the ministry is now working on the new European numbers for the future, maybe broader than the European Union, but at least for the European Union as well. So this will be something that is important not only for the exposure limit values and legal components, exactly as you mentioned, that legal component is only one thing, but what could the Commission do to work on those particular words that are mentioned on the screen, eliminate occupational cancer? And it's not enough to just talk about the exposure limit values. I'm sure that the European agency is working hard with the campaigning and so on, but at the same time we need action in every 28, so far 28, maybe 27 in the future. Action in every member state, including workers, including employers, to take care of that. Could we work on some sort of a campaign to eliminate occupational cancer? And that means that the Commission is a much powerful place to convince, for example, other people around in the member states, but also talking about the International Labour Organization, talking about the World Health Organization and so on. If what I proposed, elimination of occupational cancer to ILO and WHO, in principle they said it's fine, but it's so clumsy, it's so difficult to get anything through, and they don't even believe in their own idea. Eliminating smallpox for the WHO was excellent success. We could have exactly the same success for at least European Union here for eliminating. And that's exactly the point that was mentioned also in the week or two ago in the Vision Zero conference. We should look for zero harm in the long run. I think we are not talking about key performance indicator. What could Commission do? What could workers do? What could employers do? In particular, to convince other people in Europe to take this as a major item. I think not just the numbers and not just the exposure limits, but doing that. But keeping also in mind that we can have concrete action to eliminate something. For example, on asbestos. We had banned asbestos, and it's excellent work. And if we don't do work now on that, we'll see the consequences 20 to 30, up to 50 years in the future on cancer. So better work on now and looking at those all kind of measures, the whole range of any kind of carcinogens. Diesel exhaust was mentioned over here. It was only recently endorsed by the International Agency for Research of Cancer. If we wait for the IARC to do anything, it may take another 20 years before other carcinogens come up. So we can work on the prevention. I'm not talking about compensation or anything like that, but working on the preventive ideas. So my question is to you, what are your responses?
Thank you, Jukka. Who would like to respond? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned in my intervention what the trade unions are doing. We've been launching for years several national campaigns where trade unions put pressure on employers and national authorities to introduce better regulations and also to strengthen the role of trade unions at the workplace with the health and safety representatives, for instance. And to address what Jessie said in her intervention, that when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprises, very small companies who don't really have trade union members or health and safety representatives, where there you can also learn from each other. Like in Sweden, for instance, where I come from, we have regional health and safety reps who can also go to companies where it doesn't have trade union members. So that's very important to learn from each other, and that's why we try to do it from the trade union side, as I said, to put pressure, but also to work together with the employers. I think that's what I thought about. Yeah.
Yes. Going back on what Pelle say, I think it's important that we build trust between social partners at all levels, that they can work together to eliminate occupational cancer. That's why we have activities together with the TIMECODE to foster capacity building of social partners in the European Union, especially in countries where you have maybe a less stronger culture of social dialogue, and also have instruments that are easily implementable. It's a French way of saying it, I guess. But yeah, measures that can be taken by anyone, not just someone that is a scientific and that knows in depth the process, but Mr. Nobody or Miss Nobody that knows what to do. I think it's important that we simplify the way we talk to people, that they feel they can understand, and to show that it's not so difficult on the ground to take those measures to protect the workers.
Yes, and then from the Commission side, I think the answer is twofold. So one very important part of this work is done since now 25 years by Bilbao, by the agency, when it comes to the campaigns and the far-reaching campaigns through the focal points and really reaching out to the member states. So that is clear. But also at the Commission level, we have these instruments, and I mentioned the strategic framework on OSH, which is coming to an end at the end of next year. So, of course, the question arises, what will come after that? And I think a strategy or a strategic framework could be the kind of instrument maybe that you are thinking about, Jukka.
Thank you. I think we're going to have one last question from Mario from the Dutch employers. Can you introduce yourself, please, Mario?
Thank you very much. Mario Vermierlo, member of the Advisory Committee, a member of the Committee of Business Europe. Working together is very important, is very essential, and it's not just up to social partners. It's just up to working together with the Commission. And what I'm asking is, how can we challenge the national health institutes to come up with feasibility studies which are reliable and with measurability of occupational limit values? And that's really working together on the national health and safety institutes, in fact health institutes, together in the European Union. And how can we challenge them?
I know. I think you've given us pause for thought. You've given us, yeah. Anybody else like to? One final response there? Yeah, oh, he's not finished. Okay.
I don't take no for an answer. I just want this answer by tomorrow.
Okay, by tomorrow. We need to get back to Mario tomorrow. Can you just make a note of that, everybody, please? Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you to the members of our panel, if you just wait there for a moment. And I'd also like to say thank you to all of you for listening and for joining in so enthusiastically. Just before we go in a very timely fashion, I might add, to the coffee break, and let's face it, who wouldn't like a little cup of coffee now? I would just like to tell you that 2 workshops, Workshop 1 and Workshop 2, are on the same level as we are now. No effort required. You can just slide out the door and after your coffee, head to the workshop. The Workshop 3 on REACH is downstairs. What can REACH do to support us in protecting workers' health? It's in room 3 downstairs. And the other 2, Workshop 1 is in room 17 and Workshop 2 is in room 15. The idea is you now take a few moments, have a coffee, and then you make your way to the workshop room. We won't be meeting again this evening in plenary. We will, however, be meeting for dinner because our hosts have very kindly invited us out for dinner. And so just to let you know, there's no transport to the dinner. It has absolutely nothing to do with any strike whatsoever. It's just that the dinner is very close to the hotel, the Scandic Gran Marino Hotel. And they are asking you to meet in the hallway the problem is I was given 2 times. I was given 19 hours and 19 hours 10. So I don't know which is the correct one. Does anybody have a clue? Should we meet at 7 or at 7:10? Pardon? 7-ish, I'm told. 7-ish. Perfect, perfect. Excellent answer. So we're meeting 7-ish in the lobby of the hotel, and we will have guides who will have signs to bring us to the dinner, and the signs will say roadmap on carcinogens dinner. They're clever, these Finnish people, I tell you. So, right, so go and enjoy a coffee, go into the workshops, work hard, and tomorrow morning we'll resume back here at 9 o'clock to hear what went on in the workshops. Thank you all, and thank you to the panel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Jessie.